The committee will come to order. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. It is our job to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs, the General Accountability Office, the Inspector Generals, and others to help bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is our mission, this is our passion, and this is why today we are celebrating that over the past 4 years, on a bipartisan basis, the committee's majority and minority have taken up and moved several bills designed to reform government. Without a doubt, one of the most important transparency reform initiatives done by this committee has been the Data Act. The Data Act is the first shot in what should be a technological revolution that will transform how we govern. Shortly before we sent the Data Act to the President for his signature in May, the GAO Comptroller General, Gene Dodaro, came before this committee and testified that the status of Federal program data is abysmal. Agencies have no standardized performance metrics for programs. Agencies cannot tell us how many programs they even have. But most importantly, agencies do not and usually cannot tell us or know themselves how much taxpayer money has been spent or given to a particular program. Spending information that has been provided has been historically incomplete, out of date, and most often inaccurate. We in the transparency world recognize that you have a right to know, that the American people have a right to know, that your leaders in Congress have a right to know. But what we are talking about with the Data Act is management within the executive branch has the greatest single need to know, and if they can't tell us, that means they can't be told for their management purposes. Today we are joined by the Comptroller General, who again will discuss his initial work on Data Act implementation and update us on the status of problems data is designed to address. The American people deserve to know if Federal taxpayers are being wasted or being wisely spent. But the performance information collected today is almost useless because we cannot determine the amount of resources a program actually consumes. There is an expression that is not used in government, but it is used in business, and Senator Warner, who joins us today, very well knows this. You must be able to count if you are able to manage. The absence of the ability to count performance is the absence of ability to receive performance. This is true in a sales force. This is true in every single individual that works for a company. People want to be evaluated not based on somebody's opinion, but based on facts. Performance data is essential in good management, both in the private sector and in government. To better oversee the Federal Government, Congress and the President have appointees that must be able to better leverage technology, particularly appointees of a President who come in and stay for 2 to 4, maybe up to 8 years, come in from the outside world where they are used to knowing and getting worthwhile data. They are usually shocked that they ask career professionals for answers, and the career professionals give them answers based on years of experience, but not based on quantitative and measurable data. The Data Act is possibly going to change that if it is properly implemented. By compelling agencies to report their financial information in standard formats, the policymakers in Congress and in the executive branch will have the information necessary to truly make informed decisions. More importantly, we can give the American people better information to evaluate the government's performance for them. The bill directs the Department of Treasury and the White House Office of Management and Budgets to establish these data standards and otherwise implement the law. Today we are joined by senior officials from both agencies charged with the implementation of the Data Act. Under the Act, Treasury Department is authorized to establish a cutting-edge data analysis center modeled on the successful Recovery Operations Center, better known as the ROC. The Data Act calls on Treasury to build on innovative technology and ideas, the ROC, that were used in the ROC, and extend its applications to spending across the Federal Government. The Data Act specifically provides for the transfer of technology currently in place at the ROC. If Treasury acts to establish the new Data Analysis Center, it will be a vital tool of law enforcement agency and the Inspector Generals in their investigations. The Center will also help agencies protect against improper payments. Today we will hear from Treasury Department officials about the progress in establishing the Center. We also expect to hear from OMB about progress made toward establishing a pilot program to develop consolidated reporting for receipts and Federal funds. Hundreds of billions of Federal taxpayer dollars are spent by State, local, and tribal governments, universities, and private institutions every year. Today, these entities may well and often do waste millions of taxpayer dollars complying with duplicate and complicated reporting requirements. In a modern era, there is no reason for an entity to fill in mindless forms with the same information time and time again. At the end of the 2-year pilot, under which some recipients report to a single entity in a standardized manner, the Director of OMB will issue guidance to all Federal agencies on how to streamline and consolidate reporting requirements. When fully implemented, consolidated financial reporting by agencies and other recipients will give unprecedented insight into Federal spending. The American people will finally be able to track how we spend their dollars. By simply opening up the information, journalists, academics, and citizen watchdogs will be able to create tools that help the American people understand where their taxpayer dollars are going. But we also know that transparency is not the only benefit of an open Federal Data Act. Private sector businesses will have the opportunity to utilize data to create products and services to deliver real value to the American people. Our efforts have been not only bipartisan, but bicameral. Our partners in the Senate, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia and Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, who are with us today, have shown amazing leadership. And in fact, the bill signed by the President was authored by Senator Warner. They join us here today for a few remarks, and I am pleased to welcome them. And at this time, I am pleased to recognize my ranking member with just one caveat. I want to take a moment to look at Jerry Conley and say something. Jerry, you have often been the bane of my existence. But when it comes to your leadership in this and your tenacity, I want to personally thank you because, in fact, Mr. Cummings is a fine-ranking member, but you are, in fact, an advocate for technology and improvement in the government sector, and for that you deserve a special shout-out. So thank you, and I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would echo your words about Congressman Connolly. As a matter of fact, he and I talking about his efforts just yesterday, and I said almost the identical words. I could have swore you overheard me. No, not that part. But it is, I want to begin by recognizing, Mr. Chairman, that it was your vision and bipartisan approach that paved the way to the successful enactment of the Data Act, and I really do mean that. And I've often said in these hearings that this is our watch. It's not about this moment, but it's about generations yet unborn. And we ought to be able to track dollars that hardworking taxpayers pay. They give their blood, their sweat, and their tears. They look at their returns on April 15th, and they say, well, where does the money go? They look at their paychecks every 2 weeks, every month, and they say, where does the money go? And I think this legislation goes a long ways towards helping them understand where the money goes. They simply want it to be spent in an effective and efficient manner. and hopefully this will cause those who are spending it to do just that. From the very beginning, Mr. Chairman, you worked closely with me and my staff, as well as the administration and the Senate, to craft a bipartisan bill that would provide the American people with information about how their money is being spent. Senator Warner and Senator Portman, we thank you for all of your efforts and what you've done. You've been a part of the watch, and we congratulate you. Your leadership and commitment got this landmark legislation over the finish line, and you should be commended for that leadership. Now the ball has been handed off to President Obama and his administration, and they have to run with it. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses from the Office of Management and Budget and the Treasury Department about the administration's efforts to implement the DATA Act. President Obama has shown his support for open data. He issued an executive order on May 9, 2013, that requires all newly generated government data to be available in open, machine-readable formats. President Obama also joined 7 other countries in launching the Open Government Partnership at the United Nations in 2011. That partnership has now grown to 65 countries that pledge to create action plans to make government information open and accountable. The DATA Act builds on this ongoing work. This new law requires agencies to report detailed information about how they are spending money. Agencies are required by 2017 to begin reporting information using common data standards developed by OMB and the Treasury. OMB and the Treasury are then required to report the information agencies provide in a searchable and downloadable format. Once implemented, these requirements will improve oversight and accountability. Congress and the public will have an unprecedented amount of transparency into agency spending. Agencies will also be able to better use their own data to identify trends and make smarter funding decisions. Comptroller General Gene Dodaro said in testimony before this committee early this year that the DATA Act was one of the single biggest things Congress could do to address wasteful spending. I agree with this assessment, and I congratulate all of our stakeholders for working together to get this legislation passed. Our work did not end with the enactment of the DATA Act, however. It is critical for Congress to stay engaged with regular bipartisan oversight, just like this hearing. Congress also must ensure that agencies have the resources they need to carry out the requirements of the DATA Act. As many of you know, I frequently say that we need to make the government work more effectively and efficiently. And I've often looked at the way government is run sometimes and said, we are better than this. And so the DATA Act is law now. And so it's been implemented, and now we have to make sure that we move forward with it, and so that it can be as effective and efficient as we intended it to be. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute?
Without objection, so ordered.
I wanted to take an opportunity here at one of our last hearings in this 113th Congress, and on behalf of members on both sides of the aisle, I want to thank you for your service and your tenacity, your love of and passion for this committee, and your love and passion for this country. You have tackled some very difficult issues. You have plowed ground where there hasn't been plowed before. And there are members here, again, on both sides of the aisle that are very grateful for your service and your commitment and your love of what we do. And it's contagious. And I personally came here as a young, fresh, eager-eyed person, and you opened up the opportunities and gave a lot of leash to a lot of us to do things that we didn't think we would be allowed to do. And other committees, they aren't allowed to do. But you have made us proud in every respect. We want to thank you for your leadership in every way, shape, and form. You've carried a fairly big gavel here, and we have a token of our appreciation. If with a little indulgence here, I would like to present that on behalf of the members here and the committee, and thank you again for all that you've done.
Oh, wow.
Elijah, I needed this sooner.
Mr. Chairman, surprise.
Senators, you got to behave.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized for 1 minute out of order?
With the indulgence of our Senate visitors, so ordered.
Surprise! Let me tell you, I enjoy fighting with you more than anyone. And believe me, this is a compliment. You don't need that big thing. I mean, you are not a pushover. You stand up for what you believe in. And very briefly, this bill is incredibly important. It is deep and strong. Implemented properly, it will make a more trust in government from the American taxpayer. And it's a significant tribute to you and Mr. Cummings working together to make government work better for people. So I join my words in congratulating you.
Well, thank you. And Senators, I apologize for not giving you a Fox moment.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Virginia.
I thank you, and I hope my colleagues from the Senate will indulge. I want to congratulate you as well, and I can only thank God you did not have that gavel when you began your chairmanship. But it is fitting that you get it at the end of your tenure. And I just want to congratulate you today on the news that the FITARA legislation, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, is in fact headed for passage both in the Senate and in the House. And I say congratulations to you. It was an honor collaborating with you on such an important topic, and it's a great way to cap your career as chairman of this committee. Congratulations.
Thank you. All other accolades could wait until the Senators have gone to get to their vote, because I do know you have a vote in just a few minutes. We will now recognize the senior senator from Virginia, Senator Warner, and the junior senator from Ohio, Senator Portman. And if senior goes first. Now, Mark, you haven't taken yourself out of running for president either.
I don't feel that senior. I don't feel
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cummings. And let me, my friend Jerry Connolly took the words out of my mouth already. Having watched some of your proceedings, if you'd had that big gavel throughout your whole tenure, you might have seen some different results. So let me add my congratulations to you as well. It's great to be here with my friend Rob Portman, and echoing what you have both said on the DATE Act. It's remarkable when we do something significant in a bipartisan way that could have as much effect, as Mr. Cummings has said, on future generations, yet how little attention it gets when we actually do our job, and particularly on a subject like this. And I think it's appropriate at times that we all rightfully argue about how big or small the Federal Government should be. But I think we all share a common belief that whatever size the government should be, the dollars that we spend, we need to make sure are spent wisely. And one of the things I want to again commend you and the ranking member on, as a former governor, often thought the difference between a governor and a legislator was a legislator thought the job was over once the bill was passed. When in actuality, it's really the implementation is where the rubber hits the road. And hearing what both of you have said, and I know my friend Senator Portman shares this as well, we're going to keep common cause to make sure that the implementation of the data bill actually takes place in a timely and effective and efficient manner. And as you know, as we went into some of the last hours of trying to get this bill signed off on, and I don't think this was as much the administration itself, but certain particular agencies, resisted the timeline that we were putting forward. And again, I think it was a tribute to you and Ranking Member Cummings and those of us in the Senate as well to make sure that we keep this administration and future administrations' feet to the fire. The DATE Act really does have, I'm going to echo what you said, and I'll try to do it fairly quickly, obviously has tremendous promise to hold government more accountable and to provide actual, critical, usable information to policymakers as we try to make more informed budget decisions, because for the foreseeable future we're going to be in tight fiscal times. And as well to look at how we reform part of the structures of the Federal Government. As has been said already, the most critical component of the DATE Act is the development of consistent government-wide financial data standards. I remember one of our first conversations as we kind of dug into this. One of the most remarkable things I found early on in this, the Department of Defense alone has 200 different financial reporting systems just within that one department. As somebody who spent longer in the private sector than in the public sector, that's just unacceptable and totally unaccountable. An important part of trying to get consistent standards and a subject of much debate is how we define program across the Federal Government. You've already indicated, and I know you're going to hear from Mr. Dario later, a recent GAO review of the first attempt to create an accurate inventory of all Federal programs, an inventory required by earlier legislation that we all worked on, GIPRA, again, a piece of legislation that most Americans have never heard of, but is a good step along this direction. The first attempt to try to define program was really not all that promising. Specifically, GAO found that agencies were allowed to select from one of several approaches when defining programs, which led to an inconsistent categorizations. GAO also found a lack of coordination amongst agencies, resulting in different definitions for programs with a similar focus. Again, that would never stand in any Fortune 100 company into the 21st century. I hope we can all learn from this first attempt to define program and will adapt an approach with data that will be more useful to policymakers and support greater transparency. Obviously, one of the things as well is to make sure that we have these new financial standards across all of government. For example, right now, I know many universities in Virginia and many universities in each of our respective states file similar financial reports multiple times to multiple agencies. If all this reporting redundancy were streamlined, we could actually direct more resources to the actual programs rather than to the administrative overhead. I hope the administration will come back to us with some helpful recommendations to streamline and improve the reporting processes for those who receive Federal funds. And lastly, I'd like to mention the need to make usaspending.gov website more user-friendly. Now, we've moved this over, and we've had a lot of discussions in the development of the DATE Act about where this ought to reside. We came to the conclusion at the end of some debate that this ought to be at the Department of Treasury. But we've got to make sure the Department of Treasury really does this and implements this program in a way that's consistent with the goals that all of us who laid out in the DATE Act. Make this information more user-friendly to the public. One of the analogies I tried to use as I tried to explain this to my press corps was, you ought to be able to Google your tax dollar all the way down to the programmatic level. We've got to stay on this, and I want to add one last comment as well. As Chairman Cummings mentioned, we've got to make sure that these agencies have the resources to actually implement. Sometimes, again, as a business guy, you've got to invest to actually save money in the long run. And trying to make sure the agencies have the resources to do these reviews, set up these systems in a way that makes sense, will obviously save us resources in the long run, and again, make our jobs as policymakers in making these budget decisions, I think, more accurate and appropriate. One last final comment before I turn it over to Senator Portman. We continue to make small progress in incremental ways in this area. I want to again thank you and my friend Jerry Conley, and all of us work together on another piece of legislation that's in this same area of government oversight that the President signed into law just last week, the Government Reports Elimination Act. It's amazing. This one is actually a little more tangible. It identified and eliminated 50 reports that government agencies produce that are never looked at, never reviewed. We should be able to do 5 or 10 times that amount. We've got new legislation, Senator Ayotte and I, that's going to come back again. We'll work with this committee to keep plugging away on that. But we need to make sure in every avenue that we show that we're spending the taxpayer dollars wisely. This is something that crosses party lines, ideological lines. And I want to thank you and the ranking member again for working with Senator Portman and I to get this very, very important piece of legislation through. Look forward to working with you on implementing it.
Thank you, Senator Portman.
Thank you, Chairman Issa. It's great to be back here in the committee room. I started off here in my congressional career. I was, I think, the most junior member of the lower body in the minority. In fact, I was at the kiddie table down here. You know, this is a great committee, and one of the reasons it's a great committee, it has the potential to help us to be able to allow the people we represent, taxpayers, to understand government better. And this legislation is a classic example of it. You know, you both talked about it, Senator Warner talked about it, but it does allow the people we represent to track where those hard-earned dollars go and how they're being spent. And there's a lot of work to be done on implementation, and we're going to talk about it for a second this morning. I hope that you, Mr. Chairman, will continue to be very involved with this with us, because this was something you had a passion for and helped to launch. You and Ranking Member Cummings had a little kumbaya moment this morning that is reflective of the way you handled this all the way through. And it's good government. It's good stuff. It does give Americans this unprecedented view into their government if we implement it properly. And a lot of it comes from something pretty technical, which is transforming this spending data that's now owned by the government into something that is accessible, and that would be standardized, machine-readable data. It's not easy to do, and that's why I think the implementation is so important. I think it will result in not just more accountable government and not just better managed government, but also a lighter touch, you know, more efficient and lighter government. The implementation of this requires some sustained focus by the executive branch, but also by Congress. That's why this hearing is so important, and I know you're going to have some testimony later about how things are going. The first step, and I'm not going to repeat what Senator Warner said, which was good about reporting processes, usaspending.gov, making it more user-friendly, the need for investment up front. But there are some things I think that we ought to focus on this morning with our witnesses, and I look forward to getting a report as to how they answer all these questions. We know that some of these benefits that can be generated by uniform, comparable data and detailed financial information is going to be only aspirational until we can actually see this implemented in the proper way. The standardization, we were told, had to be completed within a year of its enactment. That's under the Data Act. It became law on May 9th, 2014, as you all remember. So that means we're halfway through this period of standardization implementation. How's it going? I didn't think it was going very well at first, to be honest with you, and some of us talked about this. All four of us have talked about it. I think it's going a little better now. Shortly after President Obama signed into law, you require OMB issued a statement saying, implementing the Act's requirements will be based on current funding and time frames that permits. Not very encouraging. And I don't think that sent the right message at all. We did have Sean Donovan, now OMB's director, before our committee, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and we asked him about this during his hearing. And the response we got back was that he indeed was going to prioritize this if he became OMB director. That was more encouraging, and I think we've seen some improvement. I know, for example, that Treasury and OMB have been holding meetings with Federal and non-Federal stakeholders now. They've solicited and received public comments on this standardization issue. The meetings have generated a lot of information that I know will help inform the scope and format of the data standards to be adopted. I understand Treasury and OMB also believe they're on pace to meet the deadline, which would be May of next year, for publication of these data standards. If that deadline slips, it's a real problem, because if that one slips, then other implementation deadlines will also slip. And I think all bets are off as to when we'll fully realize the full promise of the Data Act. So I hope those questions will be answered today as to whether they really are on track. Again, it's not easy, and it requires a lot of focus. As Chairman Ranking Member knows, when I was at OMB and had the opportunity to implement FFATA, which was far from perfect, and we'll talk about that in a second, and that's one reason we needed this legislation. It took a sustained effort and a concentrated effort. Otherwise, it just won't happen. So let's not use this May deadline to avoid the hard work required to craft standards that aren't just applicable across the whole breadth of government, but also that are comprehensive. On that front, in terms of comprehensive, the signs are a little bit less encouraging. In May, OMB published a controller alert that informed Federal stakeholders that the Data Act requires the establishment of government-wide data standards for information posted to usaspending.gov. In its testimony today, OMB refers to usaspending.gov data standards I saw. That's not quite right. The law actually requires that the standards include, quote, common data elements for financial and payment information required to be reported by Federal agencies and entities receiving Federal funds. That's what the legislation says. That is, the Data Act requires the creation of data standards not only for those data elements that must be published on usaspending.gov, but also for all data that agencies include in their required financial reports, and that all recipients of funds must include in their required reports to agencies. So it's broader than that. Despite OMB's continued reference to usaspending.gov data standards, I remain hopeful that OMB and Treasury will develop these comprehensive data standards and infrastructure that can handle the whole landscape of Federal spending information. And that's required by the Act that we put forward. In addition to being comprehensive, data standards must also be flexible. Well, we can maybe talk more about that later. We know we've got to get on to the witnesses, but that's another part of this I think ought to be asked about today. And of course, data standards are just the beginning of the implementation process. One of the steps is to ensure that the processes and procedures are in place to ensure that agencies actually use these standards to consistently, accurately, and timely report spending data, and the Treasury and OMB use that information to publish timely and accurate data on usaspending.gov. We know that neither of these processes happens automatically. For example, thanks to the excellent work by GAO this year, we now know that Federal agencies failed to report nearly $619 billion in Federal spending to usaspending.gov during fiscal year 2012, the most recent year for which we have this information. GAO also found major deficiencies in the quality of the data that agencies did report. So the Data Act, properly implemented, should address some of the root causes of these failures. One of the causes was that FFATA, again, which I was able to implement when I was at OMB, did not establish government-wide comprehensive flexible data standards. A fully and effective implemented Data Act will address that issue. Another cause of these failures is that FFATA did not establish a mechanism for effective oversight. And again, I think Chairman ICU, Mr. Cummings, and Senator Warner and others wanted to be sure that we had a better mechanism to ensure this is going to be subject to proper oversight, not just here in Congress, but also agency inspector generals and GAO would carry out their statutorily required oversight functions. I understand GAO is already working with agency inspectors general to develop some of these standards so that there is auto oversight protocols to monitor compliance with the Data Act. I look forward to seeing the results of those efforts, and that might be something that will come up today as well. Finally, I would just want to say that this is a great example of what we can do when we put our minds to something that helps our taxpayers that we represent. It was both branches, so bicameral. It was up here in the Hill, but also working with the executive branch. It was bipartisan, I would say even nonpartisan. And it's a very difficult political environment to legislate, let's face it. But this is a place where Chairman ICU, Ranking Member Cummings, Senator Warner, Senator Coburn, Senator Carper, and others decided, here's a problem. Let's attack it. And it's this opaque, murky information out there about government spending. Members of Congress from both parties engaged each other, engaged the executive branch. We hammered out the details of a solution. And by the way, as objections emerged, we worked together to try to address them without wavering in our commitment to address the problem. Now, this model may not be able to be applied to every issue, but there's certainly a lot where we have this common objective, and then it's just a question of putting together the right legislation to be able to address it. I'm hopeful we can use this as a model for doing other things into the future. And again, I want to thank Senator Warner for his leadership in the Senate, Senators Carper, Coburn, you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. It wouldn't have happened without all of your involvement, and I look forward to continuing to work with you on ensuring that it is implemented properly.
I want to thank both of you for coming to this side, but more importantly for being an active part of making this happen. This wouldn't have happened in a divided Capitol if it wasn't for the fact that it crossed party lines. So that's been extremely helpful. I've lost Mr. Conley, but Senator Warner, I'm sure you'll tell him that I actually was given this at the beginning of my tenure, and I chose to never use it because I always felt that I was already too loud on the hammer with the small one.
I imagine there were some witnesses who are grateful for that.
So
Double-fisted now.
I thank you both. I would only close by saying in the next Congress, I hope we can not only continue on the Data Act, but recognize that this committee's jurisdiction and your counterpart on the Senate side, we oversee the National Archives. And the quality of the data that goes in there, sadly, is going to, for a long time to come, be mostly paper or digital equivalents of papers. Lots of PDFs, lots of things that cost a large amount of money to convert, and even then are never as good as if they were put in a machine searchable format. So I believe that financial is important for current, but for our progeny, I think we have to also invest in leaving a legacy of deep information that future generations can easily search. So hopefully we'll use this as a base and continue across the spectrum. I thank you. We'll take a very short recess.